Explaining the Falklands War. In 1690, an English explorer made the first accounts of the Falklands Islands, though the islands may have been explored long before that. In 1765, the British established a colony on one of the islands and claimed the archipelago for themselves. Unknown to the British, the French had done the same. In 1767, the French colony was handed over to the Spanish. In 1770, the Spanish would push the British off the islands, but eventually, due to threats from the British, the Spanish would allow them back on the island. Both the Spanish and the British would eventually abandon the islands due to revolutions in the Americas. These islands would remain abandoned until the newly independent Argentina allowed a German merchant, Louis Vernet, to settle on the islands. The Argentinians would then establish him as the governor of the island, which would anger the British, along with fishing disputes. The British would then take back the islands, and the islands would remain in British hands for a long time. That would be until 1976, when the Argentinian military staged a coup, and George Rafael Videla would be put in power. Wanting to gain land and to gain popularity after their economy had basically crashed, they planned to steal the Falkland Islands from the British. The British had made huge cuts to their military, and were on the other side of the globe from the Falkland Islands, so the Argentinians thought it would be easy to take the islands. They were right about one thing. It was very easy to get the islands. They were heavily underdefended. But one thing that they were wrong about was the fact that they thought that the British would not protect the islands. They were completely wrong. Cheers could be heard around Buenos Aires in response to the invasion of the Falkland Islands. Little did everyone know that the British, under Margaret Thatcher, were getting ready for an invasion. British troops would eventually make it to the island, and even though they were heavily outnumbered, the British Air Force was able to defend the Navy. During the war, a British submarine would controversially sink the Belgrado, an Argentinian ship. The British definitely did not have air superiority in this war, and the Argentinian planes would eventually sink the HMS Sheffield. Eventually, 4,000 British troops would land in the heavily underdefended St. Carlos Bay. In response to this, the Argentinian Air Force would sink many carrier ships owned by the British, which carried things like helicopters, meaning the soldiers had to travel on foot. Most of the troops would march to the capital of the Falkland Islands, Port Stanley, while 500 more would march to the Argentinian garrison of Goose Green. The British would eventually win at Goose Green and would gain a morale boost. The British troops were only 19 kilometers away from Port Stanley, but due to an entrenched Argentinian force, they were unable to advance. The British force would be bolstered as reinforcements arrived in June. With these now larger numbers, the British would attack in the night and win consecutive battles over and over. This would eventually lead the Argentinians to be pushed back to Port Stanley, where they would eventually surrender. In conclusion, the Falklands War was a short war, and it was also strange because it was fought between two countries in opposite hemispheres. Thank you for watching this video on the Falklands War.